I think the conversation around soulmate is so split because people are not just debating what the show is, they are debating what they want queer stories to be. For some viewers, the series feels emotionally exhausting, bringing back memories of countless other queer stories built around pain. For others, it feels like one of the most intimate love stories they have seen in a long time because of how deeply it focuses on connection, instead of trying to hit every beat people usually expect from a romance story. That's why the discourse around soulmate right now is so interesting to me. People are watching the exact same story and walking away with completely different feelings. Some feel manipulated and frustrated, while others feel deeply moved by it. I can understand both sides, but I really enjoyed Soulmate, and I want to talk about why. A lot of people have had a really emotional reaction to the series. Tweets calling the show trauma dump BS, accusing it of killing off gay characters for no reason, or insisting that it is definitely not BL because Johan and Ryu never become physically explicit, spread across social media almost immediately. And I get where that frustration comes from. People are bringing years of exhaustion with media that hints at queer romance while refusing to fully commit to it, along with decades of queer stories built around suffering. So when viewers watch Soulmate spend hours building emotional intimacy between two men, only for one of them to develop ALS and doomed to face inevitable death after years of separation, it makes sense why some people walk away feeling more exhausted than moved. I understand why someone would ask, why are we still telling stories where gay characters suffer endlessly instead of just letting them be happy? And that reaction makes sense. At the same time, I think reducing Soulmate to bury your gays or bromance ignores what the series is actually trying to explore.
守ろうとしたんだろう、ソウルを。
Because this isn't a story where queerness only exists through fan interpretation or vague subtext. The show establishes gay identity, repression, and homophobia as major parts of the story almost immediately. Less than 5 minutes into the series, a father is screaming at his son outside Ryu's apartment for being gay, saying he has shamed the family and turned them away from God. The son screams back, "Damn the church," that he would rather die than live without the person he loves. Ryu clearly has something on his mind after this. Then we get a flashback and see that Ryu's hockey teammate Arata confessed he liked him before. Ryu basically froze at the time, later admitting that he was scared of his own feelings in that moment. Fear had already taught him what acknowledging something like this could cost. Rumors spread anyway, and Arata jumps. That storyline becomes one of the emotional scars that defines Ryu for the rest of the series. What makes it even more heartbreaking is that when Ryu later apologizes to Arata after he survives, apologizing for rejecting him, for not protecting him, Arata tells him he doesn't need an apology. He says he knows Ryu was protecting himself. The scene quietly forces Ryu to confront something he has barely allowed himself to acknowledge, that fear and repression had already been shaping his life long before Johan ever entered it. That emotional repression lingers over the entire show. Going back a little, right after Arata's attempt, Ryu enters a church confessional believing he has committed some kind of sin. His guilt goes beyond simply rejecting Arata. It feels tied to his own confusion, fear, and inability to confront what he is feeling himself. On the other side of the confessional is Johan, there to confess a sin of his own. Moments later, the church catches fire, started by the same boy who was rejected by his father in the opening minutes of the series. Ryu barely reacts, accepting death, until Johan pulls him out of the burning building. This moment sets up the emotional core of the story before the two even truly know each other. From there, their relationship is built around repeated acts of saving one another. Johan first saves Ryu physically. Ryu later saves Johan emotionally after the violence and isolation he faces in Korea. Years later, Johan tries to save Ryu one final time by disappearing before ALS forces Ryu to watch him slowly deteriorate and take on the burden of care. That is part of why the accusations of queerbaiting become so difficult to cleanly apply here. The show isn't subtle about gay trauma, repression, violence, or emotional longing. Johan's own storyline in the years he's back in Korea makes that impossible to deny. He frequents a gay bar, becomes the victim of a targeted attack, is publicly outed after his arrest, and returns home to vandalism, harassment, and complete isolation. The series openly portrays the consequences of homophobia and the psychological damage it leaves behind. At the same time, Soulmate remains deeply restrained when it comes to physical intimacy and explicit romantic articulation. That is why the discourse exists in the first place. Some people see this as an interesting writing choice and emotionally truthful to the characters themselves, others see it as avoidance. And I think part of the disconnect also comes from genre expectations. Because I agree that soulmate isn't really BL, but even that depends on how you define BL now, because the genre has changed so much that there isn't really one agreed definition anymore. BL and queer media are also not always treated as the same thing by production companies or streaming platforms. I think that's because they are usually trying to do slightly different things, even if the line between them has become more blurry. BL as a genre is usually built around the romantic progression of the couple. The appeal comes from watching two characters move toward openly acknowledged romance and hit the plot points people expect from a romance story. The crush, the confession, the kiss, the relationship conflict, and everything that comes with it. Queer media feels broader than that. The focus isn't always just, will this couple end up together? It is usually more interested in a character's queer identity, how it shapes their life, their relationships, and their personal journey outside of one romance. It can be just as or more focused on everything else as it is on romance. Don't get me wrong now, that doesn't make it better or more mature than BL. The separation between the two can get pretentious very quickly. And at this point, there is so much overlap that the distinction isn't always useful anymore. But in Soulmate's case, I do think the difference matters because a lot of viewers went into the series expecting a more modern BL structure, and instead got something quieter, sadder, and much more emotionally ambiguous. Netflix described the series as a soulful love, a decade guided by fate, and tagged it LGBTQ. And that is exactly what the show is. If that isn't the kind of story someone wants to watch, that is completely fair. But I also don't think it's accurate to dismiss the series as bromance slop, queerbait, or meaningless just because it doesn't follow a conventional romantic structure. Sometimes a story isn't failing to communicate love. Sometimes it is communicating love in a language the viewer personally doesn't connect with. And context matters. Part of what makes audiences suspicious is that bromance has increasingly become a marketing strategy in the BL space. A close male friendship story isn't inherently a problem. Stories about male vulnerability, emotional dependence, and deep friendship are genuinely valuable, especially in a culture where masculinity is still so tied to emotional repression and distance. The problem is not male friendship itself. The problem is if there is deliberate use of the bromance label to create romantic tension, ship culture, and sell a pair with emotionally charged scenes, while already knowing the story has no intention of meaningfully engaging with those implications. When creators knowingly frame two people through gay subtext while hiding behind, "they're not gay no way," whenever audiences ask questions or do something homophobic after getting what they want from the audience, viewers start feeling manipulated rather than respected. The history and growing trend again absolutely shapes how Soulmate is being received. The reason I hesitate to fully place Soulmate into that category, though, is because the series never feels smug or coy about its emotional intimacy. It doesn't feel like it's teasing audiences for fun. The restraint feels embedded into the emotional damage of the characters themselves. Ryu and Johan are people shaped by fear, shame, violence, repression, illness, and survival long before they ever find each other. Their inability to fully articulate themselves feels tragic rather than evasive. Part of what makes the series work for me is that it trusts the audience to read emotional intimacy beyond direct exposition. There is a long-standing storytelling principle of show, don't tell, and Soulmate leans heavily into that approach. Stories do not always need characters to directly announce every feeling out loud for those feelings to exist. Sometimes love is communicated through behavior, sacrifice, routine, silence, grief, and the ways people continue choosing each other over and over again. And Soulmate is filled with those moments. The series constantly frames their connection with the emotional language of romance, even when it avoids traditional romantic milestones. Their time together in Berlin feels less like two bros hanging out and more like two people slowly building a life around each other. From their days together in Japan to the road trip in the final episode, the series frames them with the softness and intimacy of dates, full of domesticity and the constant feeling that both of them are trying to preserve moments they know can't last forever. Even small moments carry that emotional weight. Ryu catching Johan after that run itself filmed with an almost euphoric sense of release. The way both of them repeatedly prioritize the other person's happiness. The series rarely verbalizes these emotions directly, but it constantly structures them like love. If you're here, then I'll want to live longer. I just can't see this relationship as emotionally insincere, even if the series remains physically restrained. The love isn't hidden, it is everywhere. It is a writing choice for this specific story, and it works. It's not a 10-season show playing in the audience's faces with breadcrumbs. The real question with Ryu and Johan is whether viewers find their restraint emotionally moving or emotionally frustrating in the context of this story. There is something deeply intimate about Ryu casually keeping a Korean language learning book in his apartment. The series never stops to underline it with dramatic dialogue, but the implication is obvious. These two men are slowly learning how to speak to one another more fully, both literally and emotionally. Even the final exchange of "I love you" in Japanese and Korean feels like the culmination of that idea. Their relationship is built through translation, through reaching across emotional and cultural distance, through trying to understand each other in ways neither of them fully knows how to verbalize. The show constantly communicates love in similarly subtle ways. There is a moment where Johan softly tells Sumiko's baby Kanao that he finally knows what happiness is. Ryu overhears him and asks what he said, and the scene lingers on Johan smiling quietly instead of fully answering. The moment works precisely because the series allows the audience to sit inside the implication. The baby is part of that happiness, of course, but the framing strongly suggests Johan is also talking about the life they have built together and the person right in front of him. That is why so many people walk away from Soulmate feeling like they absolutely watched a love story even without conventional romantic payoff. The series spends its entire runtime showing Johan and Ryu choosing each other over and over again. Johan saves Ryu from the church fire. Ryu uproots his life to help Johan after he is outed and attacked in Korea. They build a home together, they help raise a child together. Johan disappears because he cannot bear the thought of Ryu dedicating his life to taking care of him while he deteriorates, because he knows that's what Ryu would do. Even after years apart, the emotional center of both their lives still points back toward each other. That doesn't mean viewers are wrong for wanting more. There are absolutely moments where the series pushes emotional intimacy so far that the lack of physical or verbal clarity can feel almost surreal. Combined with the unusual domestic dynamics between Johan, Ryu, and Sumiko, restraint can create a sense of unreality that some viewers interpret as avoidance. I understand why someone could watch this story and think, "You gave me decades of longing, devotion, and soulmate framing, but still stopped short of letting these men fully exist together." The strange domestic setup only adds to that feeling. Sumiko loses her husband tragically before their daughter is born, and then spends years seemingly emotionally suspended in grief. Ryu, Johan, and Sumiko build a home together that almost feels symbolic rather than realistic, with curtains separating rooms instead of walls, as if none of them are ever fully able to construct permanent emotional shelter for themselves. Even the later mention of Ryu and Sumiko potentially marrying for the daughter feels less like romantic resolution and more like another example of people trying to survive loneliness through practicality. But that emotional suspension may actually be part of the point. Soulmate kind of feels less interested in realism than emotional permanence. The characters move through life like people emotionally frozen at the moments that hurt them most. Time passes, but grief remains untouched. Love remains unfinished. Conversations feel suspended somewhere between confession and silence. Even Johan's illness slowly transforms him into something ghost-like long before he actually dies. That same haunting atmosphere also reframes one of the most criticized parts of the story: the years where Ryu seemingly doesn't search for Johan at all. On the surface, it feels unbelievable. If Johan was truly his soulmate, how could Ryu simply let him disappear? Why would Sumiko wait an entire year after hearing from Sua before telling Ryu that Johan was sick in Germany? But emotionally, it is consistent with the way these characters survive pain throughout the series. Ryu has spent his entire life avoiding direct confrontation with loss, guilt, and desire. He freezes when Arata confesses to him. He sits inside a burning church instead of saving himself. He spends years emotionally coexisting with Johan without forcing clarity onto their relationship. When Johan disappears, there is a sense that Ryu almost accepts the disappearance because searching for him would mean confronting everything Johan's absence actually means. It would mean admitting the enormity of what he lost. The scene where Ryu finally breaks down after finding Johan's art journal at his parents' home feels important for that reason. The grief only fully surfaces once Johan becomes tangible again through the traces he left behind. Then the truth finally emerges through Sumiko and Sua, and Ryu is forced to confront how much time has already disappeared between them. That inability to fully reach each other directly is tragic. but it also feels central to who these characters are. Soulmate is filled with people who love deeply while struggling to fully express it until time is already running out. Which brings the conversation back to the larger debate surrounding tragic gay stories in general. The exhaustion many viewers feel is real. For decades, gay narratives were disproportionately associated with suffering, repression, illness, secrecy, and death. Straight love stories are allowed endless variety, while gay stories are often expected to justify themselves through pain. When audiences say, "It's 2026, why are we still doing this?" they are responding to a very real historical pattern. But sadness alone doesn't make a story regressive. There is still value in stories that explore grief, repression, illness, and emotional longing, especially when they do so with this much tenderness and humanity. Soulmate doesn't frame love between men as something shameful or disposable. If anything, the series treats the connection between Ryu and Johan as spiritually enormous. Their relationship shapes the emotional trajectory of nearly every major event in the story. They repeatedly save one another across decades of their lives. Even when separated by years, the emotional gravity between them never disappears.
いい物語だろう。
俺の物語だ。
The show is called Soulmate for a reason. I think some viewers hear that title and expect fulfillment. Soulmates should get to be together. Soulmates should overcome everything. But Soulmate seems interested in something sadder and far more human than that. It asks what happens when you meet the person who changes your life forever, yet neither of you can escape fear, shame, illness, or time itself. What if meeting your soulmate doesn't save you from life? That is why the show lingers with me the way it does. Not because it presents love as meaningless or doomed, but because it presents love as something profound enough to shape an entire life, even when it can't fix one.